So do you remember when Harry and Meghan first announced their Colombia trip, their little trip to Colombia? When it was initially announced, the press releases were discussing it as being a trip that was going to coincide with this inaugural ministerial conference about violence against children, or solving and preventing violence against children. And it's a worldwide group of countries and organizations that decided long ago to create this conference to be held annually with the specific focus on this subject matter. And a lot of really well-respected organizations joined in, and actual government leaders in countries around the world signed up to be part of this conference annually. And the first one was set to be held in November of this year in Colombia, which has already happened. The program has concluded. But Harry and Meghan's initial announcements about their trip to Colombia described it as something that was going to be happening during this time, coinciding with this conference. But then suddenly they were headed to Colombia right away, and their trip occurred far sooner than anyone thought or expected, and it felt like a last-minute rushed thing, and that's part of why the trip itself looked less polished and less put together. The playlist on that trip can be found here. I'll try to link it for you at the top of the screen. But if you remember, the rumor was that they had attempted to host a panel. You know how they like panel discussions. It has Meghan's favorite accessory, a microphone. It's the perfect opportunity to repeat more of their vacant talking points for the 50th time. And so they applied to be part of this program, to host an event for this program. This conference has some pretty heavy hitters involved, some big, legit names and organizations and people. And well, let's be honest, Archewell, Harold, and the Meg are not legit. And so their application to be part of this conference in an official capacity was denied or rejected or blocked from participating. One source claimed that Meghan had written the vice president of Colombia a letter sort of appealing the decision, sort of like a plea to reconsider and allow Harold, the Meg, Archewell to participate in this conference. And while the vice president likely didn't have much sway over the conference, she was able to offer a compromise, which was the trip that we saw thrown together in Colombia a couple months back. It was sort of like a plan B that they put together, and this video was arranged. Before we get into this video from Harry and Meghan, I would like to invite you to subscribe if you have not yet already. Click the thumbs up button if you would like to, and leave a comment if you want. If you don't know what to comment, just leave a yellow heart. So Harry and Meghan made an official appearance in this video, which was used as a sort of introduction to a conference event, virtually, obviously. And that's why it's a big nothing burger. Clearly, it was pitched to the conference organizers as the Sussexes wanting to thank the participants in the conference, the organizations, the countries involved, for doing the conference at all, for the work that they were going to be pursuing during this time. So there's lots of problems with this. Obviously, most importantly, or most glaringly, it's clearly irrelevant, the Sussexes' introduction, their involvement, this video message, to the actual conference itself, and just in the grand scheme of things. It's very clear that it was yet another attempt at this faux royal work. Say this conference was happening in the UK. Perhaps some government leaders from the UK were participating. They may have, I'm not sure. But in that context, it would have made a lot of sense for the Prince and Princess of Wales, for example, or maybe even Queen Camilla, to deliver a video message thanking the conference, thanking the people for participating, for their work, and showing a sign of support for it. That would have made sense for the real royals to do, any of them, if they were involved directly, if the UK was somehow involved in the conference. This year, it was hosted in Colombia, and Sweden and WHO are kind of the main organizers or sort of hosts. To have Harry and Meghan, who are US-based and not affiliated with any of these groups, who had their application to participate rejected, allegedly, It really doesn't make any sense for them to be delivering this message. It's weird and out of place. And they were even kind of deceitful in their approach to this. Rumor being that they approached the organization and the VP after being rejected and after their little stint, weird trip to Colombia, saying they would like to have a thank you message played at one of the events. It was a sneaky way in for them to plug Archewell and themselves. We'll get into more of their motivations in a moment and the other things happening behind the scenes, but there really was no reason for two randos to deliver a thank you message to a conference. It was entirely unnecessary. They delivered no value, but they got a lot in return, as per usual. Part of why this came across kind of cringy and nonsensical is the very fact that Harry and Meghan are not representing anyone or anything. They're not tied to any of the organizations or countries involved, and they're no longer working royals. As I said, it would have made sense in the context of a working royal delivering a message like this if that country was involved in some way, shape, or form. But that is not the context we have here for this and for Harry and Meghan, who are ex-royal. Some people have taken issue with the timing of this video message being put out and publicized, which is completely understandable. Prince William is doing a fantastic job with Earthshot in South Africa and has recently wrapped up that trip. We will be looking at the fashions for that hopefully in the next few days. But in this case, Harry and Meghan likely were not in charge of when this got put out, though they did publicize it once it was put out, because they basically just submitted it to the conference to play for the participants, for the people gathered there, for a completely different event. And it was just a simple introduction video. Again, playing fake royals is cringy in and of itself. It was weird, of course, very unnecessary, delivering zero value to the conference. All of that valid. At the same time, the timing of it was not really up to the Sussexes. The conference was happening just during those few days. They didn't need to send links to the video and publish it on their site and push it out to the press to try to make a big deal of it, though. That is where they made yet another distasteful choice. Had they just sent the message and left it at that, quietly put out a story on the Archewell website, it wouldn't have looked so bad and it wouldn't have drawn such criticism. But because they publicized it, as usual, publicizing it, wrong choice, they have received backlash for it. Another layer to this is the value that it did provide the Sussexes. They got a lot of benefits from this. They got to appear important and involved, not just to the conference, but in the media in general. Their names alongside this legitimate initiative is undeniably giving an impression to some that they're part of this group, on the same level as the WHO or the Swedish government, for goodness sakes, and more, when they are very much not. Before we get into what they said specifically, in terms of the images here for their little announcement, I thought it was kind of interesting when Harry was talking. Sometimes it was full shot where you could see Meghan standing there staring into the camera. But when Meghan was talking, it was usually a shot of just her, where Harry was not in the frame, which I thought was kind of an interesting choice. In terms of the actual video message itself, the imaging here, I think it's okay. They're both wearing professional dress, but something about it is just looking a little bit amateur, a little bit odd. I can't quite put my finger on it. It feels a little bit like their outfits don't really flow very nicely together. Harry's wearing something that looks to be a black jacket with a white shirt, and she's wearing navy with black. And her navy blazer looks a little bit big around the midsection, but that's okay. She can get away with things just skimming her midsection since she doesn't have a very well-defined waist anyway. It's better to have it skim than to be very tight and draw attention to that lack of well-defined waist and the shorter torso and whatnot. So I feel like the blazer and stuff is fine, but the black shirt underneath just looks a little cheap. Something about it just looks like they don't go together very good. And black and blue aren't always the best combination. She might have done better to have like a cream shirt underneath or just a blue that matched. The poppies, I think, are okay. Obviously, they are filming this in California, and There's a lot of confusion as to when exactly they filmed this and sent it out because of the words they used. But overall, I would say it looks kind of amateur. It just looks a little bit like maybe they're wearing sweatpants with blazers on top, like because the frame was just their upper body. It looks off. Something about it just looks a little off. It doesn't look as slick and polished as you would normally hope to see for a video message like this from really anybody being played at a professional conference. You would maybe just want like a plain background rather than your house. And you can also tell that they are reading off a teleprompter. You can see their eyes tracking and reading. So it may have been prepared kind of last minute as well, or just kind of wung together without much assistance. Who knows? But it definitely has a bit of an odd vibe to it. It feels unprofessional and it feels amateur just looking at it. And I've watched it a couple of times to try to put my finger on exactly what about it is coming off so amateur, but I just can't quite figure it out. As for what they actually said, they said pretty much nothing. They basically said, if you were to break it down into a summary, it would be that Harry and Meghan think that this is an important conference to have, especially when focused on digital violence against children, which in and of itself I don't think is a great phrase because it doesn't really explain what they're talking about very well. Describing online concerns in the terms of risk would be better than digital violence, because that phrase for a lot of people isn't really gonna click and isn't gonna connect very well, because people are gonna be like, violence is violence, digital is digital, two different things. But they didn't really say much else. They said that they care about it, that they think it's important, and say in several different ways that same sentiment. They repeat it in multiple different phrases and choices of words, basically saying that this is important work and it needs to be happening, and that's it. And they just kind of repeat that the entire video. Their post, however, on their website had a little bit more potential than the video message itself. They take time describing what exactly this conference is and its significance, being the first time that it's happened, and that it's focused on making sure that schools, homes, communities, and online spaces are safe for kids, and just making sure that everybody is doing what they can in policy terms, especially ensure those good outcomes. But then when it turns to Harry and Meghan, what ends up happening is it just highlights the unnecessary involvement of Harry and Meghan, because it simply says that they applaud the efforts of those actively addressing this critical issue. Okay, saying nothing basically. And then it discusses some of the events at the conference. Apparently some of the people who are connected to the Parents Network, or those few members, those few first members, attended to discuss their children's experiences. Whether or not Archewell sponsored their presence there is unknown. And then it closes by simply saying the same thing over again, that this is an important initiative, that the Archewell Foundation is happy to see progress being made, but there is still lots of work to be done and that it needs to continue to be worked on. Because Harry and Meghan are not doing much themselves and they're not connected to any of the organizations or governments involved, they're just floating around, really a far off satellite observing this from afar. It feels very vacant, very unnecessary to stick their feet in this issue at all, to be making a post about something that they are not contributing to in any fashion. It's weird. If Harry and Meghan had helped to fund something or partnered up with research firms to fund research and provide it and present it at these conferences, like done something to be involved in a greater capacity, then it would have been more well received and more respected, and it would have made more sense. But since they don't have any of those things going for them, it's just sort of riding on the coattails of this conference and trying to associate themselves with it. By manipulating the situation to provide a thank you message that ultimately did plug Archewell and the Parents Network and themselves garnered them this press that they could not otherwise get because they are not officially linked to this organization, this conference, to any of the people involved. They have no official connection to it. Then they created this situation where they were able to manipulate the press coverage of it to make it seem like they were connected to it in the headlines, because it's like they introduced this conference. They had this video message sent in like they're really important and involved and part of this group when they're not. As per usual, it's just Harry and Meghan piggybacking on other people's work and initiatives, trying to take ownership of it to some capacity, gaining lots and lots from it, and providing little to no value. That is, aside from some word salad. And because what they said was so empty, there's not even any point to going through line by line what they said, because they just repeated themselves in different words with different adjectives over and over, both in the video message and in this lengthy post on their website and the news articles. This was once again just a press grab for them, sadly. But leave it in the comments what you think. Thank you so much for joining me for today's video, and I will see you next time. Have a happy day, everybody. Bye.